In China, two ancient cities share a common past. Unchanged for centuries, Wuzhen is called the Venice of the East. Built on the greatest water trade route of the ancient world. And just down the river is Shanghai. Once a small trading port, Shanghai is now one of the nation's biggest cities, a declaration of China becoming an economic superpower. Two cities, one a window into the past, the other a vision of China's future. China's ancient civilization was built on water, a network of rivers and canals that once linked the empire. Today, water links two towns, one old and one very new. Shanghai is rapidly becoming the biggest city in China. It has more skyscrapers than New York City, and twice as many people. Shanghai's skyline stands as a testament of China's explosive growth. In just 3 decades, Shanghai's population has nearly doubled, and the city has been physically transformed by high-rises and highways. The city already contains 9 of the top 100 tallest buildings on the planet, and many more are on their way up. The Shanghai World Financial Center is the tallest building in China. Topped with a distinctive rectangular opening, it casts a unique shadow across the city. No other city has such a rapidly evolving skyline. But in Shanghai, tall buildings are not the only engineering marvels. Every day, 2 million cars and trucks travel in and out of the city over some of the 4,000 bridges in Shanghai. The Lupu Bridge is the world's longest steel arch bridge, with a central span that soars 1,800 feet over the Huangpu River. There is so much traffic in the city that multi-laned, multi-tiered highways have become a Shanghai specialty. The rapid rise of these engineering achievements is stunning. Where once there were only run-down houses and farms, there now stands a new financial district, nicknamed China's Manhattan. It took New York City more than a century to achieve its dramatic skyline. The new Shanghai skyline emerged in little more than a decade. And it all started with a river. More than 1,000 years ago, Shanghai was a small fishing village built at the mouth of the longest river in China, the Yangtze. In Shanghai, the locals call the town Hu for short, as Hu was the Chinese word for the estuary of a big river. Sitting at the mouth of the Yangtze, Shanghai was perfectly positioned to become the main artery into the heart of China for trade and commerce. Today, it's possible to look back into Shanghai's past by visiting one of the nation's most extraordinary ancient towns. Just 80 miles upstream from Shanghai is the trading town of Wuzhen. While Shanghai accelerated into the future, Wuzhen remains as a living fossil, a reminder of what life was like in a trading town 1,000 years ago. Like Shanghai, Wuzhen was built around water and became famous as the Venice of the East. Wuzhen lies at the heart of a network of rivers and waterways that spread north, south, and west across ancient China. Canals divide the town into separate districts, connected by 11 tiny stone bridges. Two rivers surround Wuzhen, linking the narrow man-made canals to the wider waterways of China. At its peak, Wuzhen had more than 10,000 households. Today, about 600 families still call Wuzhen home, and their lifestyles have changed little in 300 years. Locals build their houses over the water because everything they need literally floats past their front door. Residents simply lean out their windows to buy fruit and vegetables from boats carrying produce from neighboring water towns. The houses, shops, and warehouses that line the canals are some of the best preserved examples of ancient architecture in all of China. Most of the wooden buildings are painted dark brown. That's because the houses are constructed using timber that's wonderfully water resistant, but has a problem with woodworm. So for generations, people have treated the timber by painting it with a dark brown oil. In Chinese, Wuzhen literally means small brown town, but it's actually named after an ancient military commander. Having fought a famous battle in the region, General Wu was buried in the town that now bears his name. But it wasn't just architecture that made Wuzhen special. The trading town was once the epicenter of arts and culture in southeast China. The canals of Wuzhen even inspired an entirely new style of music.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
The ancient water town of Wuzhen has been nominated as a World Heritage Site because so much of its remarkable culture and industry has been preserved. The cobblestone lanes are crowded with visitors seeking to capture a glimpse of China's past. Tradition is still very much alive in Wuzhen. The town is full of artists and artisans, and performers singing songs unique to the region. The flower drum opera is an ancient form of Chinese song. The opera was once a kind of satirical variety show. The songs are about local people and the surrounding countryside. Their love affairs, family feuds, and ancient folk tales are all built into the opera. It's said the opera began at a time when devastating floods once drove musicians from their homes. Forced to beg on the street, they sat in pairs, beating a drum and singing the stories of their homes and history. Wuzhen's unique heritage was built around its waterways. Boats from all across China went past Wuzhen, bringing political news and revolutionary ideas. Merchants grew wealthy, trading everything from food to fabric. Wuzhen was famous for making the finest fabrics in the Chinese Empire. And the tradition continues today. Hung out to dry on high wooden beams, plain calico cloth is transformed using natural dyes unique to the Wuzhen region. Printed with designs inspired from the surrounding countryside, flowers, fields, and rivers, the bright, cheerful fabric is used mostly as tablecloths and curtains. The colorful calico cloth is made from the plain woven fibers of the cotton plant. But Wuzhen also produces fabrics that are far more luxurious. One sumptuous cloth was interwoven with golden thread and worn only by emperors, wealthy warlords, and noblemen. The story of its creation began with a cup of tea. It's said the wife of Wang Di, legendary founder of China, was drinking tea under a mulberry bush. She was watching a caterpillar spinning itself into a cocoon when it fell into her cup. In the hot liquid, the cocoon unraveled into long, soft threads. And that's when she discovered how to make silk. 6,000 years later, and artisans in Wuzhen still use traditional techniques to extract silk fibers. Instead of soaking in a cup of tea, the cocoons of the silkworm caterpillar are boiled over an open fire and stirred to loosen the fibers. Since the first empress discovered the secret of silk, making the fabric has been a job exclusively for women. For generations, daughters, mothers, and grandmothers spent their day boiling cocoons, then hand spinning and weaving the silk. More recently, the process has become mechanized. Giant industrial machines unwind the raw cocoon silk onto spools, ready for weaving. The basic process remains the same. Boiling water is still used to loosen a cocoon, and the machine unravels a strand of silk, barely the width of a human hair. It takes 5,500 cocoons to make just 2 pounds of silk. Each cocoon contains nearly 1,000 yards of silk fiber, and it takes 5 fibers twisted together to form one thread that can be woven into silk fabric. In Wuzhen, manufacturers once revolutionized the weaving of silk. The weaving machines in this silk factory were state-of-the-art technology when they were installed in 1925. Each loom has 2,000 working parts and over 100 different functions. They were specially designed to make brocade, a heavy silk fabric patterned with intricate embroidery. Nearly a century later, and they're still the best way to make silk brocade in China. Even so, it's an extremely slow process. A piece of brocade increases in size by just 3 inches a day. It can take up to 100 days to make just one silk shawl. The process of turning silkworm cocoons into fabric was so complicated and labor-intensive, it's no wonder silk became one of the greatest commodities of the ancient world. Silk was once worth its weight in gold. It was such a vital part of the economy that 230 of the 5,000 most common characters in the Mandarin alphabet have silk as their key. For more than 2,000 years, the process was kept secret. The penalty for smuggling silkworm eggs or cocoons out of the country was death. Eventually, the mysteries of silk making spread with Chinese immigrants out of Asia and into the West. Yet Wuzhen retained its reputation as one of the world's finest producers of silk. Another product made in Wuzhen also became popular around the globe. Underneath these conical bamboo lids is a smelly concoction of fermenting yeast, wheat, and soybeans. After 6 months baking in the hot sun inside shallow ceramic pots, the mixture is transformed into salty soy sauce. This factory in the ancient canal town of Wuzhen has been making and storing soy sauce using the same process for 150 years. But there was a time when soy sauce was actually made with fish. In ancient China, salt was incredibly expensive. But people discovered they could get a salty flavor from a sauce made from fermented fish. According to legend, someone once threw in some soybeans as a filler. Before long, the inexpensive bean sauce was so popular, fish was dropped altogether from the recipe. The soybeans used to make the sauce can be yellow, green, brown, purple, black, or spotted. And Chinese cooking makes a great distinction between the varieties. But soy sauce is not the only famous liquid made in Wuzhen. In China, many believe that drinking encourages creativity. Almost all of the nation's great writers and painters were thought to love their liquor, so aspiring artists also search for inspiration inside a bottle. In Wuzhen, the drink of choice is rice wine, made from a 1,000-year-old recipe. This factory is famous for producing sweet Wuzhen wine. To make the wine, sticky rice is cooked until it's soft, then cooled with cold water. Winemakers in Wuzhen use only the purest water from the bottom of an ancient well. Depending on its mineral content, water can change the flavor of the wine, and Wuzhen is famous for producing a sweet, clear liquor. After adding a little flour and yeast, the fermentation process begins beneath the straw lids. After a few weeks, the rice is removed, and the remaining liquid is distilled into wine. Stored in ceramic urns, the locals call it three white wine, from the white rice, white flour, and white water. Today, people still associate drinking three white wine with the arts and literature. But Wuzhen's most popular beverage was tea. Like the local diner, the tea house was an important place to hear local gossip and the news of the day. But according to legend, the very first tea house in Wuzhen was not a success. The young owner was losing business after accidentally serving his customers a brew made from poisonous leaves. He decided the only way to bring back his clientele was to find a legendary tea that grew in the hills. But en route, he met an old man on the road, writhing in agony. When the tea house owner helped save his life by finding some healing herbs, the old man was so grateful, he decided to share the secrets of his life's work. And since the old man was a revered tea master, the tea house in Wuzhen was soon famous for serving the best tea in China. In its prime, Wuzhen had more than 100 tea houses. They were the favorite meeting place of artists, poets, and musicians who came to discuss their work. Soon, Wuzhen was more than just a market town. With so many intellectuals gathering around the teapot, it became known as a place of refined society. Wuzhen owed its success to the rivers and canals that were the lifeblood of ancient China. The town was perfectly positioned to take advantage of the bounties that came from the water. Especially when, 1,500 years ago, an emperor dreamed of connecting all the canals and rivers in China with a single waterway. It was a dream that would change the ancient empire forever. As Wuzhen is nicknamed the Venice of the East, it's hardly surprising the ancient water town has a long and illustrious history of boat building. Archaeological evidence suggests the original inhabitants built their boats on the banks of the river, just as the locals do today. The remains of a wooden boat were recently discovered near Wuzhen and are estimated to be 7,500 years old. Today, shipyards in Wuzhen still construct sampans, the flat-bottomed boats without a keel, traditionally propelled by an oar or a sail. Chinese boat builders pioneered many different designs, including the scull rudder. This innovative combination of oar and rudder simultaneously propels and steers the flat-bottomed boats. Even more impressive was the design of a new waterway. A succession of Chinese emperors created the biggest canal the world had ever seen. To control a unified Chinese empire, the emperors wanted to connect all the nation's rivers and lakes to provide a single thoroughfare for merchants, sailors, and fishermen. In the 6th century, 5.5 million people were set to work digging a canal, linking the fertile Yangtze Valley to the cities in the north. By the time it was finished, the Grand Canal was an engineering marvel on the scale of the Great Wall of China. Wuzhen was built directly onto the enormous watery highway stretching 1,100 miles across China. By taking the Grand Canal, merchants and sailors could avoid the bad weather and pirates that plagued the open ocean. The Grand Canal was the safest way to move food from the rich agricultural lands in the south to the heavily populated cities in the north. Trade from the Grand Canal provided riches for every town along its length. But just maintaining the massive waterway was an epic undertaking. More than 11,000 grain barges, crewed by 121,000 soldiers and officers, traveled north from the fertile fields of the Yangtze Valley. By the mid-15th century, the Ming Dynasty employed 47,000 full-time laborers to maintain the Grand Canal. Today, most of the Grand Canal has been filled in, but the 310-mile section around Wuzhen is still in constant use. Barges carry wood chips, steel, and other building materials along the canal out to the Yangtze River and on to Shanghai. The contrast between the two trading towns, ancient Wuzhen and modern Shanghai, could not be more extreme. The second longest cross-sea bridge in the world, extending 20 miles into the ocean, connects mainland Shanghai with the offshore islands that have been transformed into Yangshan Deepwater Port. The original port of Shanghai was just too small and too shallow to cope with the sheer volume of goods passing through its harbor. So, in 2001, the government decided to build something bigger. In 2010, Shanghai surpassed Singapore to become the world's busiest trading port. More than 650 million tons of goods pass through the port each year, with more than 5,000 container trucks arriving at the port every day. Yangshan's deep water allows the world's biggest container ships to come calling. With 50 berths extending more than 30 miles, over 800 vessels pass through the port in a month. Shanghai has transformed the global shipping market. Its productivity and efficiency surpasses every other port in the world. But the revolution on the water is nothing compared to what happened to Shanghai on the land. The Huangpu River separates old and new Shanghai. On the west bank, the waterfront is dominated by colonial architecture built after the 1920s. But across the river is the futuristic skyline of the Pudong district, the center of Shanghai's economic boom. Pudong means east of the river, and in the middle of the 20th century, the district was muddy farmland. But an explosion of building and construction has transformed it into a global financial center. Between 1990 and 2004, more than 6,700 new buildings over 11 stories high were built in Shanghai. The biggest of them all is the Shanghai World Financial Center. Completed in 2007, it was the second tallest building in the world, standing 1,614 feet high. It's still China's tallest building. For now. Covered in 155,000 square feet of glass, it takes 3 months to wash the building's facade, a job that has unique occupational hazards. In summer, the glass gets so hot, washing water immediately evaporates, while in winter, the water freezes to the glass. It can be snowing on the 100th floor, and at the same time, raining on the 46th. The glass outside the observation deck is cleaned every 2 weeks. The Shanghai World Financial Center has the highest viewing platform in the world, more than 1,500 feet above the city. And the views are sensational. The city has become a hub for international architectural designers, racing to create the next engineering megastructure. More monuments to Shanghai's extreme corporate power are appearing all the time. These are the foundations of the biggest of them all. The Shanghai Tower will eventually rise 2,073 feet into the air, making it the tallest building in China. The phenomenal pace of the growth of Shanghai is an engine driving the nation's economy. China currently uses twice as much steel as the United States, Europe, and Japan combined. All this massive construction is no accident. In the 1990s, Shanghai was chosen by the Chinese government to spearhead the nation into the 21st century. A plan was conceived, envisioning 3 super tall buildings, each higher than the next, rising above Shanghai. It was hard to imagine such a radical transformation of a city. So back in 2002, the Shanghai Urban Planning Center built a model of their city of the future. "30 years ago, the skyscrapers towering above the east bank of the Huangpu River didn't exist. And it's not just the Pudong Financial District that has been transformed. To allow for the predicted population expansion, in the last decade, 9 new satellite cities have been created on the outskirts of Shanghai. Shanghai is set to become a megacity, unlike anything the world has ever seen. The ceaseless ambition and growth of China's most modern metropolis is reflected in the futuristic light show of Shanghai's iconic skyline. Shanghai is obsessed with light. Fluorescent patterns flicker up and down the skyscrapers, and the high-rises that don't light up are covered with enormous screens flashing digital advertisements. Even the undersides of bridges are dramatically lit with ultraviolet lights. A drive through the city is like entering a futuristic world lifted from the pages of science fiction. China is experiencing one of the most massive urbanizations in human history. By 2015, more than 700 million people will live in China's cities and towns. For the first time in the nation's 5,000-year history, the number of urban dwellers will overtake the rural population. Shanghai leads the way, with an estimated 300,000 newcomers each year, all hoping to share in the economic boom. Shanghai is predicted to have a population of 22.5 million people by the year 2020. Almost overnight, the once humble trading port has been transformed into a megacity of engineering marvels. Shanghai has reinvented the idea of China's ancient water towns, accelerating them into the future. When Shanghai was chosen to be the industrial, economic, and financial superpower of modern China, the city was called the Dragon's Head, leading the nation into the 21st century. Today, the dragon's eyes are still on the horizon, fixed firmly upon the future of the nation. Every year, the city of Harbin throws the biggest winter party in China. Working in sub-zero temperatures, an army of 18,000 men and women convert 250,000 gallons of water a day into 6,000 cubic yards of snow. And cut river ice into 1,100-pound ice cubes. They have just 4 weeks to transform an empty lot into a frozen theme park bigger than Disneyland. This is the Harbin Ice and Snow Festival. With a population of over 10 million, Harbin is one of the biggest cities in China. But unlike most of the nation's provincial capitals, Harbin has a very short history. Until 1896, the city was little more than a small cluster of fishing villages. In the Manchu dialect, Harbin means drying fish nets. Today, the small fishing villages have been transformed into a winter wonderland. Harbin is nicknamed the Ice City for obvious reasons. Winters are dry and bitterly cold. For 3 months, the average temperature hovers around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. But from out of the long, cold winter nights emerged the famous art of ice sculpture. Harbin held its first International Ice and Snow Festival in 1985, and it's become one of the biggest events of its kind in the world. But there was a time when Harbin was more famous as the Moscow of the Orient. Halfway between the North Pole and the equator, Harbin is the capital of China's northernmost province. Siberian Russia lies just a few hours to the north, which explains the frigid weather and the Russian influence on the city. Harbin owes its existence to the China Eastern Railway, built by the Russian government to connect Vladivostok to Harbin. Completed in 1903, the railroad transformed Harbin from a chaotic frontier town to an international metropolis. In 1907, China proclaimed Harbin an open city, and 19 countries, including the US, established consulates there, setting up several thousand industrial, commercial, and banking companies. At the time, Art Nouveau was the hottest ticket in architecture, reflected in the design of many of Harbin's public buildings. But the city is most famous for its unique Russian-influenced architecture. White Russians, fleeing the revolution in 1917, flocked to Harbin, creating the world's largest Russian migrant population. Within a few years, Harbin was known as Little Moscow. The streets of Harbin still contain many dome-shaped structures, a nostalgic throwback to pre-revolutionary Russia. The St. Sophia Orthodox Cathedral is one of the most magnificent structures in Harbin. The cathedral began life as a wooden building in 1907 to provide Russian troops with an imposing spiritual symbol. By 1921, Harbin had a population of 300,000, including more than 150,000 Russians. So 2 years later, work started on a more permanent construction. Today, St. Sophia Church is hailed as a monumental work of art and the largest Orthodox church in the Far East. Modern Harbin is a product of the century-old rivalry between China, Russia, and Japan for control of Manchuria. In 1932, the Japanese occupied the city for 13 years, until the Soviets took control after World War II. Harbin finally came back to China in 1946. This volatile history gives the city a richness all of its own. But in winter, people come to Harbin to admire the city's architecture of ice. The people of northern China developed a distinctive folk art, a beautifully wrought world in which ice is the carrier and light is the soul. Today's elaborate sculptures began as a winter tradition. "400 years ago, people created lanterns of ice to go fishing. The lantern began as a bucket of water brought inside before it froze solid. A hole was chiseled in the top, and the liquid drained from the interior, creating a hollow cavity for a candle. The chamber of ice formed a windproof lantern, perfect for farmers and fishermen. Anglers would cut holes in the frozen rivers and use the light of the lantern as a lure to attract fish. In Harbin, the Songhua River is frozen for 6 months of the year. So instead of fish, it's more common to see horses on the ice. You have to be tough to survive in this extreme climate. And animals don't come much tougher than the Chinese Mongolian horse. The short and shaggy horse is perfectly adapted to the terrible cold, able to graze all year round without supplemental feed, even when the ground is covered with snow. The horses are a popular attraction on the Songhua River. At Harbin, the ice is so thick, it supports a fully loaded bus. The river is used as a road, a skating rink, and a track for thousands of locals to race horses. Making up nearly 1/3 China's equine population, the Chinese Mongolian horse has extraordinary stamina. Used for long-distance riding, carrying heavy loads, and strenuous farm work. When hitched together, Chinese Mongolian horses can pull up to 4,000 pounds over 30 miles a day. They may not be the most expensive or elegant breed in the world, but Chinese Mongolian horses surely made their mark on history. Today, they pull carriages full of visitors, but once, these horses were ridden by the warriors of Genghis Khan. Despite the bitter cold, horses are not the only ones hard at work on the river. In December, thousands of people cut ice from the Songhua River to create the building blocks for Harbin's International Ice and Snow Festival. But the tradition of harvesting ice goes back nearly 3,000 years. Harbin is the coldest provincial capital in China, with temperatures falling to a bone-chilling -36 degrees Fahrenheit. But the people of Harbin have extraordinary endurance and a passion for creating immense works of art out of ice. Early in December, an empty lot is transformed by an army of artisans and festival volunteers. They have just 4 weeks to create the Harbin Ice and Snow Festival, with 5 main exhibition areas and more than 100 activities, including 40 ski fields. And much of the festival is made from blocks of ice. Fortunately, Harbin in winter has no shortage of frozen water. And in northern China, people have been harvesting ice for nearly 3,000 years. Farmers living in the highlands would flood their fields before winter. When the water was frozen, it was cut into blocks and stored in ice houses, which kept fish fresh in the warmer months of summer. Today, an army of 2,000 ice cutters work overtime for 15 days to haul 400,000 cubic yards of ice out of the Songhua River, enough to fill 100 Olympic swimming pools. Each block of ice weighs over 1,000 pounds. Trucks do some of the heavy lifting, but work on the river is done by hand. The harvesting begins at 5 a.m. in almost complete darkness and continues until 6 p.m. Every day, a 10-man team cuts and hauls a quota of more than 2,500 cubic yards of ice, enough for 200 truckloads. The first step of the ice harvest is called notching, when the river is cut into strips 1,300 feet long. Saws and chisels are used to split the ice into rectangular slabs, 5 feet long and 1.5 feet thick. Before the ice can be used in the festival, it has to pass quality control. Inspectors examine each block, looking for clear ice that will shine brightly under the festival lights. Locals say the ice of the Songhua River is particularly translucent, as it freezes slowly each winter. Clear ice is not necessarily related to the purity of the water. Transparency is usually the result of slow freezing from one direction. The flowing river carries away impurities, allowing the water molecules to freeze in a uniform crystal lattice structure. Choosing ice from the right part of the Songhua is vital. In the middle of the river, the fast-flowing current under thin ice is too dangerous to harvest. Ice within 5 yards of the bank is filled with silt and too dirty. Cutting the ice requires skill, strength, and bravery. Workers with electric saws can never cut along the direction of the current unless they want to cause the ice surface to collapse. If the ice is cut incorrectly, all the team is in danger. But despite the risks and the mind-numbing cold, some ice harvesters have been coming to the river every winter for over 20 years. Many are farmers. In just 15 days of cold, hard labor, they make as much money as they earn after several months spent on the farm. Getting the ice out of the river is just the first step in creating a winter wonderland. An even bigger army of 15,000 men and women, working day and night, transform the blocks of ice into a wonderland of glittering light. Fairy tale palaces, towering pagodas, and even an Egyptian sphinx are built from bricks of ice, cemented together not with concrete, but water. In Harbin, an army of artisans do amazing things with ice. They have just 4 weeks to transform an empty lot into China's biggest winter festival. Covering over 700,000 square yards, it's bigger than Disneyland. Hundreds of ice sculptures, some on an epic scale, are designed by local engineering students. Each structure is modeled on computers to estimate the volume of ice required and to help the construction teams visualize their task. Turning the plans into reality takes an army of 15,000 dedicated craftsmen. Chainsaws rough the biggest blocks into shape, but for more detailed work, sculptors use hand saws, picks, drills, and even scalpels. than 100 swing saws cut slabs from the Songhua River into ice bricks, 2 feet long and 1 foot wide. These bricks are the basic building blocks of the Ice Festival, forming an icy skin around a skeleton of steel. Some of the magnificent towers and castles are as tall as 20-story buildings. Without a framework of steel, they would surely collapse under the weight of 11,000 tons of ice. The ice bricks are easy to use. Instead of mortar, the workers cement them together with water, which freezes instantly in the sub-zero temperatures. The hardest part is lifting the ice bricks into position. Each brick weighs over 100 pounds. Blocks too big to be lifted by hand are shifted into position by 30 cranes and more than 20 gantries. Once the basic structure is in place, a team of chiselers go to work smoothing the surfaces. Cracks and gaps are easily filled with a bucket of water. The ice is polished until it's perfectly smooth. The finished paths and steps are incredibly slippery. So before the park opens, red carpets are rolled along the main thoroughfares to minimize accidents. Ice sculpting has even been turned into a sport. 35 teams from 16 countries travel to Harbin to compete in the annual International Ice Sculpture Competition. Teams are given 3 days to saw, scrape, and smooth a piece of art out of a chunk of ice 6.5 feet tall, 6.5 feet wide, and 1.5 feet thick. Competitors are usually from countries with harsh winter climates, like Russia, Switzerland, and Finland. The 3 days of competition are all held outside, the sub-zero temperatures making the event a test of endurance as well as artistic expression. Creating art from ice isn't easy. It's a variable and volatile medium. The characteristics of ice change according to its temperature and the temperature of its surroundings. However, there's another group of artists in Harbin who work with a very different medium. In 2007, they set a Guinness World Record for creating a sculpture more than 800 feet long, over 90 feet high, built from nearly 500,000 cubic feet of man-made snow. In Sun Island Park, the home of Harbin's Snow Sculpture Art Expo, there's no shortage of snow in winter. In theory, sculptors could just roll a snowball across the ground until it was several yards in diameter, and then start carving their masterpieces. But in practice, the snow would be too dirty, too inconsistently packed, and too heavy to move. So organizers create artificial snow. 250,000 gallons of water from the Songhua River is pumped into snow machines, generating 6,000 cubic yards of pure, clean snow every day. A convoy of trucks carry the snow from the river to the snow sculpture park. Sculptors prefer working with artificial snow because it's more weather resistant and remains whiter longer than the real snow on the ground. However, even artificial snow is too powdery to be worked with chisels, so the snow has to be seriously compressed. "24 teams of snow sculptors from 14 countries come to Harbin to compete in the Festival of Snow and Ice. Each team starts with a block of snow 13 feet tall, 10 feet wide, and 10 feet thick. Long before the sculptors unpack their tools, snow is packed into massive wooden boxes and allowed to settle. To make the blocks taller, more boxes are piled on top and filled with yet more snow. When the walls come down, the sculptors go to work. Unlike carving blocks of ice, snow sculptors have to start at the top and work their way down. The hardest part is creating the intricate details. Sculpted snow is very hard to fix once it's fallen apart. In past years, teams of 600 sculptors from 40 different countries used 4 million cubic feet of snow to create epic sculptures. Each year, the festival has a theme. In 2011, it was fairy tale kingdoms, and sculptors created everything from gingerbread houses to palaces, fairies and monsters, and even a snowy Medusa. Snow sculpture is a form of performance art. Sculptors work outdoors in full view of spectators. Competitors have just 3 days to transform 36 tons of snow into intricate pieces of art, so sculptors often work throughout the night. And working beside the artists is a huge support crew, preparing the frozen city and its roads for the million visitors arriving for the opening of the festival. There is no shortage of volunteers ready to help. When the festival opens, international craftsmen have created more than 300 pieces for the Harbin Snow Sculpture Art Expo. The artwork looks even better at night. Lit by spotlights and lasers, the sheer size of the snow sculptures is brought sharply into focus. In 2011, the biggest piece was more than 320 feet long and took 200 workers 2 weeks to complete. This remarkable sculpture is composed of nothing but compacted snow, yet it's overshadowed by its neighbors, extraordinary structures carved from ice, towering high above the frozen city of Harbin. The Great Wall of China is the largest man-made structure on the planet, more than 2,000 years in the making. But this Great Wall of Ice was built in a matter of days. Just one of hundreds of famous structures created as part of Harbin's International Ice and Snow Festival. The Great Wall of Ice surrounds one of the world's largest ice sculpture parks, containing some of the finest examples of ice art on the planet. Many sculptures are surprisingly interactive. In a recent festival, the Great Wall of China doubled as an enormous ice slide. The slides can be slippery, speedy, and scary. Luckily, people are well padded with multiple layers of clothing, so the only thing damaged is dignity. Each year, the designs are different. The ice sculptures are considered a never-to-be-repeated fairy tale, as once they're melted, they're never built again. In 2011, the festival's theme was Fairy Tale Kingdom, so craftsmen created sculptures of landmark buildings from around the world. In 2011, it cost $18 million to create the theme park. Visited by more than 1 million people who braved the frigid conditions to explore the icy wonderland. Some people even come here to be married. More than 1,000 couples from across China, Russia, Japan, and the United States have used the ice sculptures as an incredible backdrop for their wedding ceremonies. The centerpiece of the ice and snow world is an icy fortress, modeled after Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany. Complete with working elevators and escalators, the structure is almost 150 feet tall and 270 feet wide. In winter, days are short in Harbin. Visitors usually make the most of the sunlight to explore the art on display in the Festival of Snow. The carriages return to the Festival of Ice at night, because that's when the architecture of the Ice City really lights up. When darkness falls, more than 60 miles of LED lights encased in translucent building blocks transform Harbin into a neon fantasy land. In the frozen northwest of China, when the sun sets at 4 p.m., the sky lights up. This is when the ice city of Harbin comes alive. Once, visitors to the International Festival of Ice and Snow saw a world lit by standard incandescent light bulbs. The introduction of weather-resistant fluorescent tubes saw a revolution in the icy architecture. Suddenly, structures could be built bigger and brighter. In 2008, more than 100,000 fluorescent tubes were carefully placed in blocks of ice during the construction of the massive sculptures. Laid end to end, the lights would stretch more than 60 miles. But recently, the festival has gone high-tech. Instead of thousands of single-color fluorescent tubes, 80% of the ice and snow world is now illuminated by computer-controlled light-emitting diodes. The LED lights can put on quite a show. Cooler than standard bulbs, the LEDs are also more environmentally friendly. They have a longer lifetime and consume less energy. And Harbin is becoming increasingly aware that the environment is changing and its famous festival is under threat. Today, the average winter temperature of Harbin is 9 degrees Fahrenheit warmer when compared to data from historical records. According to the local meteorological bureau, the rising temperatures have had a detrimental effect on the event. In 2007, warm weather kept the Dunhuang River flowing through autumn, meaning organizers had to ship ice down from the north. In 2008, huge screens were erected to prevent sculptures melting in the heat of the midday sun. But on this night, the temperature is a reassuring -4 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sculptures are safe until the arrival of spring. The wonderland of ice and snow will eventually thaw, and millions of gallons of water will drain back where it came from, into the Songhua River. But by then, work will have begun planning an even bigger and better festival in Harbin, the icy heart in the land of the dragon. In far western China, at the edge of the largest desert in Asia, is the oasis called Dunhuang. Once one of the most strategic fortifications along the Great Wall of China, and a vital trading post on the legendary Silk Road. A cultural melting pot of merchants and monks, Dunhuang was one of China's earliest Buddhist centers, where 800 caves are decorated with exquisite murals. This forgotten fortress from an ancient past is now a symbol of China's greener future. Shining in the searing heat, deep in the land of the dragon. The deserts separating China from Europe and Western Asia are some of the most hostile environments on the planet. Yet men once crossed this land of death in search of riches. Braving temperatures of more than 120 degrees, epic sandstorms, and marauding bandits, camel caravans traveled along the most important thoroughfare in the ancient world, the Silk Road. The Silk Road was a transcontinental route linking the Roman Empire with the imperial court of China. The Silk Road was the information superhighway of its age, serving as the conduit not only for goods, but also for the transmission of knowledge and ideas between East and West. The Silk Road is a misnomer, for it was actually many roads, originating in towns and cities all over eastern China, but all converging on one ancient city, the oasis called Dunhuang. Situated at a crucial crossroads at the edge of the Gobi Desert, Dunhuang was one of the westernmost cities in ancient China and was a key supply base for caravans moving along the Silk Road for more than 1,000 years. In the 2nd century AD, the high fortified walls of Dunhuang contained a population of over 30,000. Business was good. In Chinese, the words Dun and Huang mean brilliant and prosperous. Traders in Dunhuang were middlemen, making handsome profits, because very few merchants traveled the full length of the Silk Road. Extending 4,000 miles, the Silk Road was actually an extensive network of routes connecting China to the Mediterranean. The sheer distances between cities meant it took years to complete the whole journey, over routes that were often little more than rough caravan tracks. goods changed hands many times. Merchants keeping within their own well-known territories would meet, sell their items, and if lucky, return home, because their routes were perilous and plagued by bandits. So it was often with great relief that traders approached the safety of Dunhuang and the Chinese border. Today, visitors can catch a glimpse of life in Dunhuang 2,000 years ago at a recreated border crossing. Every merchant, foreign emissary, and pilgrim had to pass under the watchful eye of the Dunhuang border guard before they could travel in or out of China. There was always a strong military presence in Dunhuang, partly to deter the ever-present threat of bandits who took advantage of the wild terrain to plunder unguarded caravans. Anybody who wanted to leave the empire to travel abroad had to visit the commandant's office to apply for an ancient passport. These bureaucrats were the world's first paper pushers, as paper was invented in China during the Han Dynasty. Dunhuang marked the limits of civilization, separating the organized Chinese world from the barbarians of the West. To leave the safety of the walls was to venture into culturally alien lands. 1,300 years ago, the barren wasteland inspired Wang Wei, a poet of the Tang Dynasty, to write, "Drink another cup of wine, I bid you, for you will see no more friends out west." Surrounded by enemies, the first fortifications in Dunhuang were built as early as 121 BC. Within 10 years, a military colony of 2,000 soldiers extended fortifications beyond the city. Today, Dunhuang is surrounded by the remains of several ancient forts and watchtowers, built to support garrisons at key passes along the Silk Road. The Huatang Fortress was once a grain store supplying the desert garrisons. The walls, 20 feet high and 5 feet thick, have survived for 2,000 years. Successive dynasties spent extravagant amounts of money building and maintaining the fortifications of Dunhuang, and not just to protect caravans from pirates on the Silk Road. For centuries, China had been under threat from hordes of mounted nomads that ruled Central Asia. The only thing between the raiding parties of fearless horsemen and the heartland of China was the garrison at Dunhuang, standing on the greatest wall the world has ever seen. In ancient China, enormous caravans of up to 1,000 double-humped Bactrian camels traveled the Silk Road to reach Dunhuang on the empire's western frontier. The desolate deserts held many perils, but the greatest of all were the nomadic people called the Shunu. Today, the fearless horsemen from Central Asia are long forgotten. But in the 3rd and 4th century BC, the Shunu were such a menace to the Chinese Empire, they brought about the creation of the greatest defensive fortification the world had ever seen. At the time, China was divided between many warring states, so Shunu raiding parties sweeping in from the desert encountered relatively weak opposition as they destroyed crops, seized farm animals, and took prisoners as slaves. But in 221 BC, everything changed. Having conquered all the independent states, Qin Shi Huang declared himself the first emperor of a unified China. To protect his realm from the nomadic hordes in the north and west, the emperor came up with an ambitious plan. There were many small fortifications spread across the western frontier, built by independent states to defend their towns and cities. The emperor decided to connect them all together, forming a continuous barrier along his threatened borders. A determined band of barbarians could have scaled the walls, but they wouldn't have been able to carry their horses with them. And horses were a vital part of the nomadic Shunu's military success. In Dunhuang, a replica fortress complete with siege engines and spiked defenses illustrates the sophistication of the 2,000-year-old fortification. It was a precursor to the massive structure known today as the Great Wall of China. Successive dynasties spent the next 2,000 years continuing to build the greatest defensive wall the world had ever seen. A vast stone dragon with its tail in the deserts of Dunhuang and its head in the ocean. 1,600 miles from Dunhuang, the Great Wall extends 60 feet into the Bohai Sea. It's the biggest man-made structure on the planet, costing more than 1 million lives, and the modern equivalent of $360 billion. The most enthusiastic wall builders were the Ming Dynasty, who spent 300 years constructing the most elaborate and complete defensive walls the world has ever known. Typically, the wall was 20 feet wide at the base, 16 feet wide at the top, and a towering 25 feet tall. The Ming used about 78 million cubic yards of brick and stone to create their immense fortifications. The stone came from quarries, chipped into blocks using metal chisels and hammers, and then manhandled up the mountains. The bricks were made on site. If clay wasn't available, dirt would be mixed with water, packed into wooden frames, and fired in beehive-shaped kilns. But in the deserts of Dunhuang, there was no stone, no clay, and no real dirt. Military architects had to find ways to take advantage of the local building materials, sand and sticks. Workers laid a bed of willow reeds at the bottom of a wooden frame, and then filled the frame with a mixture of water, sand, and fine gravel. Compacted and left to dry, it formed a solid slab, strengthened by the willow reeds, just as modern concrete is reinforced by steel rods. The building material was so durable that more than 2,200 years later, the remains of a few broken sections of the Great Wall still exist in the desert near Dunhuang. Originally over 12 feet high and more than 6 feet wide, the wall was built up layer by layer, 6 inches at a time. Much more than just a barrier of earthen blocks, the wall was also a communications path, with runners moving over its top from one station to another, passing on messages. The wall was also used as an elaborate alarm system. Troops quickly sent news of enemy attack using signals of smoke or fire from a network of beacon towers. In the desert around Dunhuang, a small beacon would typically be built every 1.5 miles, a large beacon every 3 miles, and a fortress every 18 miles along the wall. Several towers, distorted almost beyond recognition, still stand in the lonely desert. The arid conditions have helped preserve the ancient structures, but blasted by sandstorms, some stretches of the Great Wall have been reduced to mounds of dirt. Sand and wind are the relentless enemy of archaeologists, the scouring grains erasing the ancient past. Yet Dunhuang is one of the world's greatest repositories of Buddhist art, the priceless treasures half buried by the shifting sands of time. The ever-shifting sands of ancient China's western frontier are an unlikely place to find a treasure trove of extraordinary art. But Dunhuang, once a thriving Silk Road oasis, was a vital thoroughfare for commerce, conquest, and ideas, both artistic and religious. In the first 3 centuries AD, many religions traveled along the Silk Road. but none influenced China as deeply as Buddhism. At Dunhuang, intrepid monks stopped to learn the Chinese language and culture, forming the nation's earliest Buddhist communities. Over the centuries, generations of monks also created one of the great marvels of the Buddhist world. Hidden behind a riverbed lined with poplar trees, in a mile-long arc of sandstone cliffs, 100 feet high. Carved into the rock face are 492 caves. Each cave contains extraordinary statues and murals spanning 10 centuries of Chinese civilization. A collection so unique that in 1987, the Mogao Caves were named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But the caves had humble beginnings. There were no holes in the cliffs until 366 AD, when a wandering monk searching for enlightenment in the desolate desert had a vision. The monk saw a golden light, as if 1,000 Buddhas were glowing on a cliff face in the desert. He took the vision as a sign. Here you must stay. So he cut a hole in the sandstone wall and moved in. The monk's meditation cell was little bigger than a coffin, adorned with a statue of Buddha. Soon, word spread, and other monks joined him, digging their own caves for prayer, rest, and meditation. Later, monastic communities began carving out larger caverns for public acts of devotion. Construction continued well into the 14th century. At its peak, there were over 1,000 openings chiseled into the rock face, nicknamed the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. The wandering monk's vision in the desert had finally come true. Pilgrims started visiting the Mogao Caves to pray, either for safe passage across the dreaded deserts of the Silk Road, or to give thanks for a successful journey. Eventually, wealthy and powerful patrons started paying people to create more elaborate temples within the caves. Artists and sculptors were commissioned to decorate the interiors with beautiful images of Buddhism. New caves, each more magnificent than the last, became a time capsule of the Silk Road. Using river mud mixed with straw as their canvas, Dunhuang's artist recorded the evolution of Chinese art and the transformation of Buddhism into a Chinese faith. Today, 492 caves contain exquisite murals that cover nearly 500,000 square feet of wall space, some 40 times the expanse of the Sistine Chapel. In contrast to the bleached desert outside the caves, thousands of Buddhas of every color radiate across the grotto walls, their robes glinting with imported gold. The most important mural in this cave is called the Forest of Recovered Eyesight. It tells the story of 500 robbers who, having been captured by troops, are blinded and sent into a forest. Eventually, they convert to Buddhism and finally regain their eyesight, showing that a person, no matter how evil, can confess and repent to ultimately reach enlightenment. The cave interiors are also adorned with more than 2,000 sculptures, some of them among the finest of their era. The grotto's biggest Buddha, a colossal 116 feet high, is the third largest Buddha in the world. When the Silk Road was abandoned by the Ming Dynasty, Dunhuang lost its importance, and the treasure trove within the Mogao caves lay undisturbed, protected by the dry desert air and its secret location. While never completely abandoned by Buddhist monks, the caves were largely forgotten until the early 1900s. Today, more than 500,000 visitors a year come to see one of the greatest underground art galleries in the world. Visitors are limited to a rotating set of 50 caves, 30 of which are open at any given time, because moisture from the people's breath damages the murals. A team of 500 conservators, researchers, groundskeepers, and guards battle to preserve the artworks for future generations. Outside the caves, the biggest enemy is sand. Over the centuries, many caves have been irretrievably damaged by sand blown in from the desert. Angled fences on the dunes above the cliff reduce wind speeds by half, decreasing the encroachment of sand by 70%. Dunes cleared by bulldozers are stabilized by planting wide swaths of desert grasses. The glories of the Mogao caves will always be threatened by an ever-encroaching tide of sand. And yet, sand can create wonders of its own. Not far from Dunhuang is the strangest national geology park in all of China. An extraterrestrial landscape that's also found on the planet Mars. The road to the ancient Chinese city of Dunhuang passes through the most expansive arid region on the Asian continent. 500,000 square miles of desolation called the Gobi Desert. In Mongolian, the word Gobi means very large and dry. According to legend, the desert was created when the armies of the Chinese emperor were pursuing a great Mongolian warrior. Desperate to escape and well-versed in the art of black magic, the fleeing warrior put a spell on the land, calling up great storms that buried the country in sand, forming an impenetrable barrier. The warrior was saved, and the Gobi was born. One of the driest areas in Asia, the Gobi sits in the shadow of the Himalayas, which block the arrival of moisture-laden monsoons. It's one of the most landlocked places on the planet, at least 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean. The desert is bone dry, has lots of sand, and is very windy. Perfect conditions to create a unique geological structure called a yardang. The name for the streamlined wind-eroded sculptures comes from the Turkestani word yar, which means ridge or steep bank. typically 3 or more times longer than they are wide, a yardang resembles the prow of an upturned ship. Micro yardangs can be just a few inches long, while mega yardangs can stretch for miles, edged out of the desert by constant abrasion from the prevailing wind. The planet Mars has yardang ridges on a massive scale, eroded by winds reaching speeds of 200 miles per hour for more than 100,000 years. Some geologists have suggested the Great Sphinx at Giza in Egypt may be a modified yardang. The higher head end of a yardang faces into the prevailing wind, its aerodynamic body literally sandblasted by the desert. Tiny particles driven by gale force winds scour the bedrock, cutting down into low areas, producing a series of parallel ridges which are gradually further eroded into separate hills. That's why most yardangs occur in fields, often called fleets, because of their resemblance to inverted ship hulls. One of the biggest fleets in the world is found in the Dunhuang Yardang National Geologic Park. Formed in 2001, the park contains an incredible variety of yardang sculptures, packed into an area only 15 miles wide and 1 mile deep. Locals have a different name for the region. As the wind passes between the sculpted rocks, it moans eerily, which is why for centuries it's been called the City of Ghosts. In spring, the wind brings more than just strange noises from the desert. When the ground warms up, the air above it rises, creating fierce northeasterly gales that carry with it the particles of sand that carve the yardangs. As a geological force, in most places, wind is not as strong as ice or water, but the winds of the Gobi can be extreme. So much sand can be carried in the gale, the locals refer to black storms when the day turns to night. Sand from the Gobi Desert can be blown as far as western North America. Driven by the wind, the Gobi Desert is expanding. Its southern edge is smothering over 1,000 square miles of grassland every year. But in Dunhuang, people are used to the shifting sands. They live beside another of the most feared deserts in Asia, the Taklamakan, also known as the Sea of Death. 2,000 years ago, Dunhuang was China's most important trading post on the western frontier, a desert oasis where east once met west. Today, Dunhuang is threatened by very modern demands. A dam built over 3 decades ago to help local farming, combined with a doubling of the population, have overstressed a fragile desert ecosystem. Farming in Dunhuang dates back more than 2,000 years to the Han Dynasty. A map detailing the region's critical water sources was found among tens of thousands of manuscripts stored inside the Mogao caves. For more than 40 years, local farmers have redirected water to feed their crops. As a result, in some places, the underground water table has fallen by as much as 35 feet. In Dunhuang, water is life because it sits next to the largest shifting sand desert in the world, the Taklamakan. So many people have perished in the Taklamakan Desert, the Chinese call it the Sea of Death. And the sea is expanding ever closer to Dunhuang, and one of its most remarkable treasures. This row of withered trees once flourished around the geological wonder called the Crescent Moon Spring. A miraculous oasis in the harsh desert, the pond, fed by spring water, is shaped like a crescent moon, although parched travelers said it resembled the eye of a beautiful woman, lucid, clear, and seductive. According to legend, the Crescent Moon Spring was formed by a thirsty general. It's said that during the Han Dynasty, General Li Guanli and his men were traveling through the perilous desert when the soldiers became too thirsty to continue their march. So General Li drew his sword and thrust it into the side of the mountain, forming the Crescent Moon Spring. Surrounded by the unforgiving sands of the Taklamakan Desert, the springs were a welcome relief for travelers along the Silk Road. Over the centuries, more than 100 temples and pavilions were constructed along the south side of the spring. The oasis became an inspiration to generations of artists and poets, painters and musicians. Visitors would stroll around the lake, watching fish swim leisurely in the water, and always in the background were the sand dunes, towering more than 300 feet into the sky. Incredibly, sand has never smothered the spring. For thousands of years, the unique orientation of the massive mountains of sand has funneled the prevailing wind up and over the dune crests, away from the cherished pool. But the ever-shifting sand is not the biggest problem facing the local government. The Crescent Moon Spring is now only about a third of its original size. That's why the city of Dunhuang is putting in place measures to restore the water supply to the historic oasis and protect its ecological environment. An emergency treatment project has successfully increased the water table in the vicinity of the oasis. But work has also begun to preserve all of Dunhuang's precious water resources. Local officials introduced a policy known as the Three Forbids, banning new wells, new farmland, and new migrants. The crescent moon spring has endured in the desert for thousands of years. With careful management, it will continue to be enjoyed by generations to come. Conservation is crucial because Dunhuang has emerged as one of the leading destinations for travelers in Western China. But Dunhuang is being transformed by more than just tourism. In the desert, the scarcity of water may make agriculture unsustainable, but Western China is booming, thanks to a resource it has in abundance: sunshine. Dunhuang is becoming famous for renewable energy. For more than 2,000 years, the ancient fortifications of Dunhuang have baked in the searing sun. Dunhuang is one of the sunniest places in China, with over 3,200 hours of sunlight a year. That's why the city of Dunhuang has an ambitious plan to cover more than 1,350 square miles of the Gobi Desert with solar panels. Prompted by a national decision to diversify the nation's energy production portfolio and to reduce carbon emissions, Dunhuang is pursuing clean energy development with a ferocity unrivaled in the world. This is the largest photovoltaic power generator in China and the first large-scale solar plant connected to China's transmission grid. Set among the sand dunes are 7 banks of dark blue panels that stretch the length of a running track, capable of generating 10 megawatts, enough to power 10,000 houses. In China, solar generating capacity is expected to jump from less than 1 gigawatt in 2010 to more than 20 gigawatts by 2020. As China invests billions to remake itself into a green energy superpower, Dunhuang is set to become a world leader in environmentally friendly technologies. Over the centuries, many important scientific and technological innovations migrated along the Silk Road. Dunhuang has always been the place where East met West. Today, visitors to Dunhuang travel in air-conditioned comfort. But things were very different for Xuanzang, a Buddhist monk traveling the Silk Road in 629 AD. He wrote of a bleak and empty desert where travelers stacked up the bleached bones of human skeletons to form signposts in the sand. It took the monk 17 years to travel from China to India and back along the Silk Road. Great caravans of camels continued to make the perilous journey until late in the 15th century, with the discovery of a sea route connecting Europe to Asia. An oasis in a sea of sand, Dunhuang was perfectly positioned to become an intercontinental think tank of human ingenuity. Today, thanks to its extreme climate and developments in energy technology, Dunhuang could once again show the world a better way to live in one of the harshest environments on the planet, deep in the land of the dragon. In the mountains of central China lies a valley so remote, it was forgotten by the outside world. 3,000 fragile pillars of sandstone pierce the misty sky. At their base, a labyrinth of limestone caves. A pristine geological marvel. This is Zhangjiajie, China's first national forest park. A paradise discovered deep in the land of the dragon. In Zhangjiajie, remarkable sandstone columns tower over snaking valleys, pristine streams, and lush forest. The region's distinct geomorphology was formed over millions of years as wind, water, and ice carved the soft rock. "3,000 spires of sandstone, stretching hundreds of feet high, are capped by oases of trees, creating a landscape unlike any other in the world." Zhangjiajie is so lush, 98% of the park is blanketed by over 1,500 species of plants. For centuries, this extraordinary landscape was a secret, barely settled and seldom visited. Zhangjiajie covers 21,000 acres in the Hunan province, buried deep in the remote and inaccessible mountains of central China. For thousands of years, law-abiding locals viewed the wild land with suspicion. So Zhangjiajie was the perfect hideout for people on the run. These misty peaks were home to outcasts and outlaws. Once, more than 10 mountain strongholds were built on top of the sheer peaks. The elevated terrain was easy to defend. The only way up was by rope. Once, an army sought refuge on the highest peaks in Zhangjiajie. 500 years ago, a local king led a revolution against the mighty Ming dynasty and lost. The king and his soldiers retreated into the mountains of Zhangjiajie, but they were unable to bear the shame of defeat. So the king and his army threw themselves from the top of the highest cliff. Some locals believe their fallen king is still alive, training his soldiers in the misty valleys. Stand close to the abyss, and it's said you can hear the echoes of an ancient army preparing for battle. Zhangjiajie was a land forgotten, an island of stone lost in rugged mountains. Until 40 years ago, only locals knew Zhangjiajie existed. In the late 1970s, Chinese master painter Wuzhen chanced upon the area. Fascinated by the scenery, he said, "This place is a bright pearl, unknown in the depths of the mountains." The painter spent months immersed in the landscapes. The area was so desolate, he had to live in a shed belonging to a local woodsman. Only when Wuzhen returned to civilization with his paintings did China learn of the beautiful landscapes in Zhangjiajie. Today, the isolated valleys are one of China's most popular destinations. The biggest attractions in Zhangjiajie are more than 3,000 incredible pillars. Floating above the mists, the stone columns seem to defy gravity. These sandstone sculptures of Zhangjiajie cover an area of 33 square miles, roughly equivalent to the size of Manhattan Island. And like Manhattan, these stone skyscrapers define the landscape. More than 100 pillars stand over 650 feet high. The sandstone columns tower above pristine valleys, testimony to the power of water and the unrelenting forces of nature. It's a world of such remarkable and unique geology that in 2004, the Pillars and Valleys became a UNESCO World Geological Park, covering an area almost the size of Rhode Island. When Chinese scientists first ventured into the lush forest, they discovered a primeval paradise full of unique plants and animals. In 1982, Zhangjiajie became China's first national forest park. Ten years later, the spectacular landscape caught the world's attention when it was named as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It took millions of years to create the extraordinary landscape of Zhangjiajie. Sculpted by powerful natural forces, the land is still constantly evolving. The history of Zhangjiajie began 60 million years ago at the bottom of a tropical sea. Once, the mountains of Zhangjiajie were remote and inaccessible. Today, gondolas glide effortlessly through a forest of stony peaks. There are 3 different aerial routes to the tops of the mountain, including the longest passenger cableway in the world. The ride is over 4.5 miles long, with 98 cars bumping over 57 towers and climbing more than 4,000 feet to the mountaintops. Being suspended in a swaying glass-bottom gondola is not for the faint-hearted. But the views from the top really are out of this world. In 2004, the United Nations declared the 3,000 sandstone spires, topped with clinging pine trees, to be one of the most remarkable geological spectacles on the planet. It's hard to believe, 60 million years ago, Zhangjiajie was submerged beneath a tropical sea. Constantly tormented by shifting tectonic plates, the seafloor was gradually lifted to become a shallow sea sitting among mountains. Runoff from the nearby mountains and rivers laid down a bed of quartz and sandstone more than 1,600 feet thick. When the waters ebbed away, the rock was exposed to the weather's erosive power. Thanks to China's intricate geology, the sandstone bed was full of vertical cracks that one day would become the deep valleys of Zhangjiajie. When water seeps into vertical cracks in the rock, it washes away loose debris and erodes the binding material holding the sandstone together. In winter, the water freezes and expands, applying enough pressure to break off pieces of the surrounding rock, which are swept away by the scouring winds. Over millions of years, the soft sandstone is eroded away, creating deep and twisting valleys. But in areas where the sandstone was mixed with quartz, the rock defiantly resisted erosion, creating the mighty pillars soaring up out of the mists. Each year, water continues cutting the valleys deeper and the spires thinner. Zhangjiajie sits in the middle of the subtropics, and monsoon rains sweep across the mountains. Each year, the stone pillars are drenched by more than 50 inches of rain. In the moist, humid conditions, every horizontal surface is covered with lush forest. The roots of trees squeeze into narrow crevices, splintering the rock, while wind and frost continue to gnaw at the sandstone. Zhangjiajie is a fragile paradise. The combined effects of weather, tree roots, and the ever-present earthquakes mean parts of the delicate pillars give way. In 1980, a huge slab of rock fell off the peak known as the Drunk Monk. Sometimes whole pillars collapse, while others, with the right degree of hardness and balance, survive, despite their missing sections. Wind and water can gnaw at the foundations of a pillar, creating a hole in the rock, which in time can form an enormous natural bridge in the mountain. This bridge is over 130 feet long, 33 feet wide, and 50 feet thick. It's named the first bridge under the sun because, suspended 1,200 feet above the valley floor, it's reputed to be the highest natural bridge in the world. Throughout the park, more than 70 pillars and rocks have been given their own name, each made distinct by erosion and its shroud of vegetation. But there are still thousands of anonymous peaks, and visitors are invited to contribute their own names for pillars with personality. However, down on the valley floor, there's a rock with a history that's said to stretch all the way back to the first emperor of China. Having been left in perfect isolation until the 1980s, Zhangjiajie is a pristine paradise. Hidden in remote mountains, far from civilization, and covered in primeval forest, the park has some of the cleanest air in China. It's even been nicknamed Mother Nature's oxygen bar. Compared to outside the park, the air contains 88% fewer dust particles and 10% more water vapor. It's been suggested the air is a medical marvel. That's why hypertension patients come here to breathe in the air and lower their blood pressure. The purity of the air is in part due to a smoking ban inside the park. Zhangjiajie is one of the only places in China that is completely smoke-free, which is good for the health of the visitors and the trees. A complete fire ban exists within Zhangjiajie to protect the incredible diversity of plants. 98% of the park is covered in forest. Zhangjiajie contains 1,500 species of seed plants. That's twice the number of species in all of Europe. And it has more than half the pine and conifer species in the world. In China, there's a saying, in Zhangjiajie stand 1,000 peaks. Among the peaks stand 1,000,000 pines. Some of the trees are survivors from the ancient past, relics from before the Ice Age, once thought extinct, only to be rediscovered in the sheltered valleys of Zhangjiajie. Nestled at the feet of the towering pillars, beneath a canopy of ancient trees, some 800 streams crisscross the valleys. One of the most beautiful and famous is the Golden Whip Stream. According to legend, the very first emperor of China wanted to fill the empty seas, so he began driving mountains across the land towards the coast, spurring them on with his magical golden whip. The plan enraged the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea, so he sent his daughter to stop the emperor. With her great beauty, she managed to distract the emperor and swapped his magic golden whip for one of plain leather. The girl then transformed the golden whip into a gigantic pillar of rock, 1,200 feet tall. The foundations of the stone whip stand by the stream to this very day, a permanent reminder of how a beautiful girl once prevented the sea from being filled with mountains. The Golden Whip Stream is absolutely minuscule on a global scale, only 4.5 miles long, but it's famous throughout China for being both incredibly pure and picturesque. These isolated valleys of Zhangjiajie are also a refuge for many endangered animals, from the Chinese giant salamander to the rhesus monkey. The Golden Whip Stream is also famous for cloud leopards and pangolins, but the constant commotion along the riverbank usually sends them all scurrying deep into the forest. Running close to the entrance of the park, the stream is one of the most popular destinations in Zhangjiajie. But not everything in this mystical land is shy and retiring. The Golden Whip Stream flows into a lake said to be guarded by a gigantic crocodile. Not all the stone pillars of Zhangjiajie float in a sea of mist. Some are suspended above one of the most beautiful alpine lakes in China. According to legend, the clear green water once enchanted a goddess. The lake was said to be the home of a heavenly spirit whenever she took a break from celestial intriguing. She spent the day staring into the water, enraptured by her own reflection. Today, she still stands by the lake as a pillar of stone, wearing a crown of trees. It's said if someone tries to steal her crown, a nearby island shaped like a crocodile will spring into life and swallow thieves whole. And there is no shortage of people wanting to admire her crown. "30 years ago, the boats and the lake didn't exist. Once, this was just another valley in Zhangjiajie, until the locals decided they needed a more permanent water supply. So the residents built a dam across the river and created a reservoir, originally meant for irrigation and a little fishing. But the lake was so beautiful, within 5 years, painters and poets were soaking in its splendor. Soon, the lake became one of the most popular destinations in Zhangjiajie. And before long, the hills were alive with the sound of music. The locals have a long tradition of song and dance, the high, clear notes carrying across the mountains, like a Chinese version of yodeling. Men and women gather at floating pavilions on the lake to sing songs of courtship. Traditionally, a man had a lot riding on his ability to sing, as the courtship ritual was a duet, and he had to match his girlfriend's vocal prowess. The yodeling punctuation point requests a response from his prospective bride. Brides traditionally sang for up to a month before their wedding, a lament symbolizing their sorrow at having to leave their family. For centuries, the locals have treasured the pristine waters flowing from Zhangjiajie, but there are places in the park where the river disappears underground into the lair of the yellow dragon. According to legend, an enormous dragon lives deep underground, beneath the mountains of Zhangjiajie. Carved from limestone rock, the Yellow Dragon Cave sprawls over more than 12 square miles. The cavern complex takes about 2 hours to explore. Today, the routes are well paved and extravagantly lit. But for centuries, the locals stayed well clear, believing the cave was home to ancient spirits and the Yellow Dragon. It wasn't until 1982 that a team of cavers set out to explore the depths of the mighty cavern. It involved some serious climbing because the vast cave is spread over 4 levels, with a vertical height of over 330 feet. The Yellow Dragon Cave Complex is one of the largest subterranean systems in China. Only partially mapped out, explorers have ventured more than 9 miles into the cave. One of the biggest single chambers is called the Ballroom Cavern. Covering 130,000 square feet, the Ballroom Cavern is said to have enough room for 10,000 dancing humans. This massive subterranean space was carved out of solid limestone by water. The process begins far above, when rainwater filters through the soil and reacts with carbon dioxide to form carbonic acid, which dissolves limestone. When the corrosive water trickles down through tiny pores and cavities in the limestone, it eats away at the rock. Cavities become cracks, and as the cracks get wider, more water enters and erodes more rock. Cracks become chambers, and chambers become caverns, big enough to house a dragon. Eventually, dripping water decorates the cavern with stalagmites until the landscape underground echoes the pillars of rock above. The stalagmites are said to be the teeth of the yellow dragon. Each tooth is formed by drops of falling water, saturated with minerals leached from the rock. Each droplet leaves behind the faintest trace of limestone, so small that each year a stalactite only grows about 5/100ths of an inch, less than the width of a human hair. Some stalagmites in the cave are over 60 feet tall, which would make them almost 15,000 years old. One of the most famous stalagmites is said to guard the throne of the yellow dragon. The delicate limestone needle is so fragile and so beautiful, it's rumored to be insured for $12 million. According to legend, the subterranean yellow dragon is also responsible for solving a water shortage. Once, a powerful magician came down into the cave to beg the yellow dragon for water, as prolonged drought had brought great suffering and misery to the land. When his pleas went unnoticed, the magician grew angry and drew his sword. Enraged, the dragon released a massive flood inside the cave that still flows to this very day. The Yellow Dragon Cave contains one of the longest underground rivers in China. The river is very deep, over 40 feet in some places, and very warm. At 60 degrees Fahrenheit, it's the perfect habitat for the cave's real-life dragons, Chinese giant salamanders that prowl the waterway, feasting on insects and dodging the tour boats winding their way through the twisting channels. The labyrinth of caves beneath Zhangjiajie are spectacular, but it's the pillars of rock above ground that were the inspiration for one of the world's most famous feature films. The stone pinnacles of Zhangjiajie appear to defy gravity. The sheer cliffs soar up to 1,300 feet above the valley. And at the top, the view really could come from another world. The forest-clad stone pillars were the inspiration for the floating islands in the movie Avatar. Researchers took photographs of Zhangjiajie as reference material for the creation of the make-believe planet of Pandora. In the film, the Hallelujah Mountains circulated in magnetic currents, floating high above the misty planet below. For centuries, one of the most famous peaks in Zhangjiajie was called the Pillar Between Heaven and Earth. In 2010, the name was officially changed to Avatar Hallelujah Mountain. After the release of the movie, 19 million people came to see the real-life Pandora. It may not float on a strong magnetic field, but there is something otherworldly about a forest suspended 500 feet above the ground on a slender column of sandstone. For the heroes of Avatar, the Hallelujah Mountains were a refuge, a place to hide from the authorities. And in China, the same thing happened at Zhangjiajie. For centuries, it was a mountain sanctuary for rebels and their armies. But today, the peaks and valleys are a fragile jewel in China's National Forest Park system. A pristine paradise, unlike any other on Earth. There is a new saying around here: Pandora is far, but Zhangjiajie is near. Discovered in a forgotten corner of the land of the dragon.